since 2022, the number of people affected by global food insecurity rose from 135 million in 53 countries in 2019 to 345 million in 82 countries in 2022. Rising temperatures are negatively impacting food supplies, and in order to mitigate the effects of climate change on food security, it's little surprise then that agriculture and food security have been a key agenda item at COP28. More importantly, can African agriculture turn the tide and become a breadbasket of sorts for the world, given the huge potential on the continent with our vast tracts of arable land? Today, I'm joined by a mega panel of professionals and experts. Here with me in the studio is Ndidi Okonkwo, Executive Chair, Sahel Consulting Agriculture and Nutrition. She has over 25 years of international development experience and is the founder of Leap Africa, Changing Narratives Africa, and African Food Change Makers. She's also the co-founder of Ace Foods Processing and Distribution Limited. I'm joined all the way in Kigali, Rwanda, by Dr. Aderemi Banjoko, who is a medical doctor by profession. He's co-founder and CEO of Kavajuru Farms Limited and Indego Farm Ventures Limited in Rwanda, and wealth management firm DKB Partners, which has offices in Lagos, Rwanda, and London. In addition, Dr. Banjoko has a passion for educating and enlightening others on wealth creation and financial literacy. Last, but by no means least, from Dubai, on the sidelines of COP28 is Ada Osakwe, a food entrepreneur who is the founder and CEO of Agrolay Ventures, which supports early-stage companies in Africa. Since 2015, the firm has built a portfolio of high-growth investments, including the Newly Juice company, which she founded, and is Nigeria's fastest-growing farm-to-table beverage producer and fast-casual restaurant chain that utilizes locally grown vegetables and fruits. Wow. Great to have you all on the show. What a distinguished collection of experts. And Ndidi, I'm going to start with you. You know, much has been made of COP28. You heard this announcement of this $10 billion fund facility to support food security. I know you go to COP28 almost every year, but you didn't go this year. But what do you make of all the commitments in the past few years and this recent announcement, and how it's going to impact the space you work in?
Well, I'm really excited that food is taking center stage at COP this year, and that food and health have become closely linked with the climate agenda. But the challenge we always have on the African continent is that these resources never trickle down. At the last assessment, I think Africa had maybe received less than 2% of something of global funds allocated to climate. And so my question is, what's going to be different now? How are local organizations and African governments and investors operating in this space going to actually benefit from these funds? And so the challenge for us is to take that ownership required, the support required, and the partnerships required to hold ourselves accountable, to hold the global community accountable to deliver. It's not just about addressing damage, which is loss and damage around floods and natural disasters, etc. But it's also about investing in growth and seeing climate and food as a nexus for growth, and green businesses and green food businesses as a nexus for growth. Not setting new standards that also limit African businesses from taking advantage of the gains, because the new trends around emission targets and regenerative agriculture could actually backfire on African farmers who are not able to meet those standards. And so it's about data, innovation, funding, and localization of not only what is required to change, but also putting the most vulnerable, the poorest of the poor who need that food, and our farmers at the forefront of that change.
Very well said. I mean, Dr. Remi Banjoko, you have a very fascinating story. You're a farmer. You run a farm enterprise in Rwanda, and you've heard what Ndidi has said around data innovation and targeting the bottom of the pyramid. I know that many African countries do get affected by climate change, including Rwanda. You use greenhouse farming as part of your strategy for your crops and the seeds that you plant for food. Tell us about how climate change is impacting the business and the farm, Indego Farms, that you run in Rwanda, and how you view this entire debate.
Thank you very much. Yes, with greenhouse farming, huge advantage of greenhouse farming, especially solar-powered greenhouse farming, is that you can make your own environment and control your own environment. Because as you say, with climate change, Where we farm, you can go 3-4 months without any rain. So you have to be very conscious of that. You have to know how to preserve water, and the greenhouse helps you do that, because with greenhouse, you're very, number one, energy efficient, so you have less carbon emissions. Number two, you save on water. And number three, with food security, you can farm the whole year round. So that's why greenhouse farming is very crucial and helps us with this issue of climate change.
And what about the broader landscape in East Africa? Of course, Rwanda is an East Africa community region. What are some of the peculiarities affecting farming and agriculture there as a result of climate change?
Just like Ndidi said, it's the money trickling down, because I think the issue now is financing, because we have the land, we have the sun. And that's a huge thing we don't take advantage of, because, for example, Holland is the second largest agriculture exporter, second to US. But even the Netherlands now, they're having problems with greenhouse farming because they cannot afford the cost of gas and electrical energy to power their greenhouses because of the crisis in the Ukraine. So their own cost of energy has gone up like, 20 times. So, production is moving to warmer climates like Morocco and Kenya. Whereas when we don't have that issue where we can use solar powered greenhouse to be more effective, but it's an expensive thing to start. So to get the solar power installed on your farm, to get the greenhouses, although in the long run they're cheaper and they save you a lot of money, but the upfront cost is a lot. And this is where financing and the trickle down of the funding and financing would certainly make a huge difference.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Ada, I'm going to come to you now. Based on your reading so far of COP28 discussions, what have been your main takeaways for food security and agriculture? Are you optimistic that some of the commitments being made will be followed through and will actually trickle down, as Dr. Remy has said?
Yeah, no, Falake, it's great to be on your show. Thank you. Africa has 50 million smallholder farmers, right? Producing 80% of the food that we eat on the continent. Yet climate change is potentially going to affect the yields of the crops and the food that's being produced, because it's going to keep going down, projected to be about 12% reduction by 2050 in yields. And that's already starting from a low base. So you can imagine why this is such a top of mind issue. You were speaking about, the effects in East Africa. You've had floods, irregular floods in Rwanda. You've had cyclones in Malawi. We've had issues of drought in Kenya, unprecedented. Right now, you're in Lagos right now, you're having rains, serious rains in December. So this is all climate change. And that's why, being at COP and having food systems and the issue around the need to drive more resilience in our food systems in light of these potentially damaging issues being caused by climate change is front and center, as Ndidi mentioned. So that's the good side of it. This was the first time that the COP28 had sessions, and an outcome of COP28 a few days ago was the fact that there was a declaration on sustainable agriculture, resilient food systems, and climate action that over 130 countries have signed up to, including Nigeria. So you have these folks coming on to sign that they would take action around climate adaptation, around making sure that our smallholder farmers, our women, our youth are protected in light of the harmful effects of climate change. However, the sad side of it is that at the end of the day, when COP ends in about 2 days' time, what happens is that they present a report called the Global Stocktake, the GST report. An early draft of this report has nothing being mentioned about food systems and the need for sustainable food systems in the light of the harmful effects of climate change. So it's fantastic that we celebrate that. For the first time, you have a food pavilion. For the first time, issues of food and health, as Ndidi mentioned, are being discussed. Nutrition is being discussed. Water use is being discussed. There was an entire food day here at COP28, which just doesn't happen on the main stage and in the program. But the flip side is that how do we get these politicians? How do we get these negotiators? How do we get these folks in the room, making sure that food actually ends up in the final outcome. Just to add that there's a lot of pressure. Even corporations like Pepsi and Nestle have written letters to say, we are seeing your early draft and we're seeing you're not saying anything about sustainability and food, and we would like to see it in. So we are still remaining hopeful that at the end of the day, we would have the language actually embedded in the final outcomes of COP28.
Thank you very much, Ada Okonkwo. Thanks for sharing some level of optimism, I guess. We're going to take a short break now. And when we come back, the discussion around food security, agriculture, and climate change will continue. Welcome back to Business Week on Arise News. I've been talking to agriculture and agribusiness experts Ndidi Okonkwo, Dr. Remy Banjoko, and Ada Okonkwo on food security, climate change, and agriculture. So, Ndidi, I wanted to come back to you. So we often talk about African solutions to African problems, but I personally being an advocate of African solutions to global problems, given that Africa, actually many countries on the continent have a comparative advantage because of our large swaths of land, arable land, how can Africa actually become the solution to global food security challenges? I know it's a bit, it's like the reverse of what we've been talking about. What do you think? I
actually completely believe that. That's the work we're doing through African Food Change Makers, actually ensuring that we scale our businesses, our innovations and technology to nourish Africa, nourish the world, and change global narratives. But I'll say there are 3 particular areas that Africa, right now in this climate food nexus, can help the world and teach the world. The first is that African food, our indigenous food, is actually extremely nutritious, extremely healthy, and we understand the concept of circular economy better than most other parts of the world. These our indigenous foods have been forgotten and not being celebrated, and the world actually needs them more than ever before.
What are some of these foods?
The most basic ones are cassava, our yam, right? Our millet, our sorghum, our beans, all the different varieties of beans we have, our moringas. But even when you get to okwa, in my breadfruit, the things that we often look down on as, our native food, extremely high protein, highly nutritious. And there's a community in Tanzania, since we're talking about East Africa, called the Hadzibe people. They eat 10 times more fiber than the average American. Their entire economy and indigenous economy is circular. Nothing is wasted. So that's one thing, adopting and scaling. And Chef Pierre is doing that very well with fonio, acha, where we're now saying we can displace quinoa as healthy alternatives to rice. But there's so many, and we've written about them. We're writing podcasts, we're celebrating them. So our food and celebrating our indigenous food and amplifying the nutritional benefits will be a gift we give to the world. Number 2 is this concept of regenerative agriculture. African farmers have been actually practicing many components of regenerative agriculture: low tillage, leaving soil fallow, using natural manures, mulching. Now the world is coming to tell us this is the right way. The world told us before, use tractors, use chemical fertilizers. Now the world is switching to use organic fertilizers. Don't use low tillage, not heavy tillage. And we Africans have been doing this for generations. The difference, though, is that we need to use more productive seeds.
And we need to scale that.
And we need to scale that, and we need to address our water and irrigation issues. But the rest of it, we do it, and we can teach the world how to do it. And then the final one I would say is we also need to enable the world to understand they already are dependent on Africa for most of the best food they love. 70% of the world's cocoa comes from Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. So if you eat a chocolate bar anywhere in the world, you're likely eating the same with sesame from countries like Sudan. The same with kola nut, which was used for the recipe for Coca-Cola. Coffee was born in Africa. 18 countries in Africa produce the best of the world's coffee. So if you've had a Coke or coffee today, you have Africa to thank for it. Telling these alternative stories changes the mindset of Africa being the face of a hungry child, or the face of Africa being a hungry child, to a successful female entrepreneur. And I think that narrative, and that's why the work you do in media and the work that we are trying to do through scaling our stories, amplifying the innovations, and the tech innovations, because we are leapfrogging with cell phones in Africa, right? Our youth understand it. And so how we connect with farmers, how we provide financing to farmers. There are many pockets of innovations that are leapfrogging, and I think that is also one growth area we can teach the rest of the world.
Thank you. Very well said around changing the narrative. But I'm also happy you mentioned the face of a hungry child, because the irony is that we also have major food security challenge. And I'll come to Dr. Banjoko now and Ada. Our global food production systems are a major source of emissions. As well, food production and supply, we use significant amounts of carbon. We burn carbon in food production. But at the same time, our food production and supply chains are also being impacted by climate change. So it's almost like a catch-22, caught between a rock and a hard place. How can we hope to end the hunger crisis, right? Zero hunger is SDG 2, but still at the same time scale food production across the continent? I'd like to hear from both Dr. Remy and Adan. I'll start with Dr. Remy.
I think that's actually, you're right. And I think this is where technology comes in. Because like you rightly say, as we know already from the statistics you said earlier, that, the food systems accounts for 70% of fresh water extracted from nature, and a third of greenhouse gas emissions are from food systems. So yes, it does impact the climate. But again, this is where using modern technology comes in, for example, with the greenhouse farming or, things like vertical farming or hydroponics, because when you use greenhouse farming, especially solar-powered greenhouses, you don't have to rely on fossil fuel. You reduce your carbon footprint, and most importantly, from a food security point of view, your production is greatly increased, and you can farm and harvest all year round because you can control the climate in your greenhouse. So you can win all around from increased production, more harvest, more production, good quality. You can control your environment, pest diseases, and at the same time reduce your carbon footprint, reduce your use of fossil fuel. So all these things can be achieved using things like solar-powered greenhouse technology. But this is where the key comes in, is in terms of financing. Because yes, luckily, someone like myself, we're in a position where we can pull private investors and afford to start a project like this, but most farmers can't. And when they try and access affordable loans that are available, the criteria they give, to bring everything, including their mother's birth certificate, they cannot, qualify for the loans to be able to do this. So I think that's usually the sticking point, where there should be, like you said, African solutions for African problems, where there should be funds where you're financing the business and the business case, and not saying, oh, bring this collateral, bring this and that. So that is actually the business you're financing, and that way you can empower people and actually get more businesses that can increase production and also help with the climate change.
Yeah, thank you. Ada, according to the World Bank, agriculture and agribusiness are expected to be a $1 trillion business in sub-Saharan Africa by 2030. And we all know that in some African markets, building resilient and successful farming on agribusiness takes a lot of blood and sweat, but it also takes a lot of finance. Ada, I'll ask you, what have been some of the emerging innovation or technological trends that are helping to close that gap in the agriculture space, whether it's dealing with supply chains or funding and helping businesses in the space scale?
There's a lot going on for innovation, and I would say that, but it's still not enough. When you think about the venture capital flows to agriculture or agri-tech, it's still less than 1% of all the flows that are coming to sub-Saharan Africa, with $5 billion, I believe, last year. But, as I think about even the other question you asked regarding, the issues of climate change and food systems still contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, we cannot get to the 1.5 degree limit of global warming that we need to get to without radically transforming food systems and the way we farm, the way we produce, the way we eat, the things we eat, the food loss, the food waste, all of that, we have to radically change it. And I just wanted to say that the way we can be part of the solution as Africans, Dr. Banjoko mentioned a few of the things, but, it's just, we still are the solution, and we have to really pay attention to how we're farming and the practices, soil health, soil fertility, the acidity of the soil, all those things. We have to think about how we are not just adapting and creating more resilience for our women, our youth to go out to the farm. Right now they're exposed to weather issues. We have to really try to provide income diversity for them. We have to provide insurance. We have to think about using satellite imagery and these technologies to provide for precision farming, knowing when to farm, at what time, what to farm, intercropping. So these are all things that African farmers today have to be supported to do so that we can adapt to the issues of climate change, which, by the way, we did not cause. We did not cause this, but we are being heavily impacted. And then as we mitigate, Dr. Banjoko, the fact that you're using solar for your greenhouses, that's fantastic. We have to start reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And we are the solution. Technology, innovation, young people are the solution to this. Right now, our average age of farmers is still at the 50, 60-year-old level. Very soon, we cannot eat and we would all die off if no young person is going into farming. And the only reason they'll go into farming today, and even when they do, is to bring in the fun, innovative, new ways of thinking and technology. And I believe this is going to be the way out for us. So that's the flip side of it. And that's what gives us a lot of hope in spite of the dire situation that we see.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ada. I'm really happy you mentioned young people. Ndidi, I want to ask you, you've worked across the value chain. You've been involved in processing, packaging. You have some of your goods from Ace Foods on shelves. And clearly there are a lot of opportunities for SMEs to come into this space. And it's, I want to ask you, have you built that business resilience? Because clearly this is a very challenging sector for an entrepreneur to go into. And if we're going to attract younger people for generations to come into agriculture, we really need to do a lot more to change the outlook for the space.
Yeah, so the first thing is we need to train our young people to get them to see that agriculture is a business, not a science. So through Sahel, we actually go to all the schools in Nigeria to do that through our Sahel Scholars Program. The second is technology and innovation attracts young people. If you're telling them they're going to go and use hoe and cutlass, they're not going to go to the farm, right? The processing facilities also should be automated or partially automated because otherwise it seems like manual labor. And that's not attractive to a young person today. Then you have to pay competitive wages. And this is where prices come in. What are the eventual prices of products, and can our products compete with imports? Now, with this devaluation, I have to say that the space that they used to give us for shelves in many of the supermarkets are now increasing because obviously locally sourced foods are competitive. And now we have interest in locally sourced foods and proudly Nigerian foods. Yeah. But that is critical to getting young people because they have to get the right salaries to stay in the ecosystem. Now, for a company like Ace Foods, we need an enabling environment to thrive. Right now, Nigerians spend the most of their household income on food than any other part of the world. I think it was 67% the last time I saw it, right?
It's probably gone up.
Yes, yeah. And 84% of Nigerians cannot afford a healthy meal. So we're in a food crisis with double-digit food inflation in the 30s, right? So we need Nigerian companies that are sourcing locally, producing high-quality food locally to be supported to scale so that we can actually feed ourselves and the world. And it is easy to feed ourselves and the world in this country because we have such great land, we have great food, historically indigenous food, and the world recognizes it. So we need to change all of that, and we need an enabling environment. That means we need infrastructure from our government, we need to reduce the tax burden on SMEs that are committed to local sourcing, and we need to ensure that we invest in policies that actually create stimulus for the economy and not disadvantage us relative to imports. And I'm starting to see a reversal of some of those trends, and that's worrisome.
Yeah, I like what you said about some of the policies and incentives. Dr. Remi, I want to come to you because I'm sure that many of our viewers are fascinated that here is a Nigerian medically trained professional who is now a farmer in Rwanda. And like Nigeria, Rwanda actually employs about 85% of the country's workforce. I want to understand a bit about what it is about East Africa or farming in East Africa that's attractive or compelling. What can we learn? And what are even some of the challenges that may be peculiar to that market? I'd love to hear from you.
I think for me, I should put a caveat there that obviously I've had an 18-year relationship with Rwanda. So that's really the underlying basis for me setting up in Rwanda. But obviously, having set up in Rwanda, the things that I find that the positive things that help, for example, in the agricultural space, there's a lot of government support for agriculture. So in terms of infrastructure, in terms of good roads, so there are good road networks from all parts of the country. Security is very important. So there's very good security. I don't worry about people breaking into my farm or doing anything crazy. And then obviously there's also the financial support. So there are lots of subsidy programs in Rwanda that can help you subsidize the cost of your irrigation, installing irrigation, buying greenhouses, and then of course access to cheap loans. For example, we've got the what we call the CDAT loan, is a commercialized de-risking loan from the World Bank, where farmers can get a loan for 8% over a tenure of 10 years, with a grace period of up to a year to 3 years. So all these sort of things, can help enable the farmer do well. So those are the sort of positive things I see in Rwanda. But like I said, unfortunately, most of these incentives and good things that are going on are not easily accessible because of the terms and conditions for you to access them, which are quite challenging for the average person. So I think that's for me the biggest thing that could make a huge difference if the terms of accessing these benefits and loans are a lot less than because most of these terms and conditions, it has to be people like myself who are already in business, who have already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars can access them. But for someone who is starting out, it can be very, very difficult.
Yeah, interesting. When you were talking about an 8% loan, myself and Ndidi here in the studio were like, wow, over a 10-year period. I mean, that's quite significant. Access to finance, of course, as we've been saying, is quite a big thing. Ada, you've been investing in agricultural ventures through AgriLay Ventures for many years, and you see a lot of the pain points that entrepreneurs have. You yourself are an entrepreneur with a food chain business, a retail business. And so I wondered for you, what would be the single biggest transformative factor that will really help catalyze Nigeria specifically, agribusiness sector for a lot of SMEs, for a lot of young people? What would be the single biggest catalyst right now from your vantage perspective as an entrepreneur?
Oh, wow. That's a difficult one. Well, the single biggest, because there's so much that needs to be done. But let's stay on this finance issue that's typically the one that's that thorny issue that we bring up, or access to finance, or lack thereof. When you think about adaptation, still on this climate issue and food systems, 54% of adaptation finance is debt. So Dr. Banjoko, even if we're celebrating that there's World Bank debt, you're pretty much saying our farmers have to pay back for things that they did not cause. So you're still giving money, but it's still, you have to pay back. And then it's already on onerous terms. So let's even think about the instruments that come into this. So much has to come into play. And I just feel like we really have to think differently. We cannot use traditional instruments that are out there. We have to tailor-make solutions for the unique problems. And every SME is different. You cannot just block everyone into one, or just, say standard sorts of categorization. So I believe we just need a more active focus on the reality of the contribution of small and medium enterprises to the community, to the GDP, to the workforce, to the food we eat. There's a lot of lip service. There's too much lip service. And if we do not get it from the top, if we do not get the right policy, someone mentioned this in today's conversation, that are driving the sustainability of businesses, we just can't go anywhere. And I don't believe it's the banks. We've done too much of blame game to our commercial banks. Banks are there to make money. They're listed entities. If something is not making them money or cannot pay back, if it's not viable, they shouldn't be doing it. So how do we make our businesses viable? And it's not only about training. Sometimes it's just about replicating certain models that have worked, right? And scaling that. We have no time. Our young people, 12 million entering the workforce every year for only 3.1 million jobs available. According to some data out there, we have to create 1.7 million jobs every single month for our young people. There's unemployment in addition to hunger. And that restlessness needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, thank you.
So I feel like we just need to put our heads together. As you mentioned, I'm an entrepreneur. I've rolled up my sleeves like everyone else here. And it's difficult. It is difficult. The environment is difficult. The macroeconomic headwinds, are difficult. You feel like you're pushing, but very quickly, the analogy I use, I say it's like I'm swimming and then I'm drowning. And just when I'm sort of getting myself out of the water, someone is there, typically the government, macroeconomic and policies, bad policies, they're pushing me back down. No, drown, you can't come out. So that for me is just a picture of what's happening.
Yeah, thank you, Ada. We obviously want you to swim, not sing. So hopefully there will be some changes on the horizon that benefit you with this new dispensation. But we've almost run out of time, but two very brief questions with brief answers, please. I'm going to go to you first, Dr. Remy, very briefly, and I'll come to Ndidi to end the show. Dr. Remy, you're an investor. You invest in other types of assets. How would you gauge investment in agriculture in terms of the returns? Because apart from the entrepreneurs seeking investment, we also need investors to be willing to put money from the private sector into ventures. So how would you gauge returns in agriculture? And then Ndidi, I'm going to come to you to ask about what we need to do today now from a policy perspective. So I'll start with you, Dr. Remy.
Yeah, I think in a very short statement, for example, if you invest in the stock market, which is a quick one to use an analogy, for example, the US stock market, which is one of the best stock markets in the world, so far this year, they've returned about 21%. I think most people will relate to that. So with 21% return, people will say that's a huge and very good return on your investment. But when you look at agriculture, obviously, I'm now talking about commercial scale agriculture. With a commercial scale agriculture, if you're doing that scale and you're doing it properly, like we're doing the greenhouse, you can get 50 to 70% return quite easily. And also the fact is that you're growing something that there's a market for. Because usually with most businesses, you're looking for the market who's going to buy my goods and services. Whereas with agriculture, there's already a huge market there waiting for you locally and internationally.
Thank you very much, Dr. Remy. So Ndidi, last word to you briefly in a minute, if you can, before we go.
Right now, there's an urgent crisis to address food insecurity. We need enabling environments. We need reduced taxation on our small businesses. We need low-cost financing that's flexible, where possible, even climate-related financing for our farmers. And we need an ecosystem that looks at food, not agriculture. A food ecosystem approach, which means that we need the tariff and quota system that protects Nigerian locally produced food and enables it to go globally.
Fantastic laundry list. We hope the right stakeholders are listening. Thank you so much for joining me today. Ndidi Okonkwo here in our Lagos studios, Adal Sakwe live from COP28 in Dubai, and of course, Dr. Remy Banjoko in Kigali, Rwanda. Thanks for joining the show today. It's great to have had you all on. Well, that's all we have time for today on Business Week. I hope you enjoyed that conversation, because I certainly did. We can continue the conversation on X. Have a lovely weekend ahead. I'm Rolake Akikube Filani, and I'll see you soon.